Hello, and welcome to another History Hullabaloo with Miss Beth here at Pueblo West Library. Today we are going to be talking all about the Vikings. And as you may have noticed, Vikings have been very popular on TV and in books lately and in movies. But I want you to think, what do you really know about who the Vikings really were? Do you know what they ate or how they dressed? What do you think of when you hear the word Vikings? Fierce warriors, scary dragon riders, the big horned helmets. Some of that is true, and some of it not so much. It's kind of turned into a myth and a legend. So I'm here to maybe help you understand a little bit about who the Vikings really were and what kind of culture they had and where they lived and when they lived, and just help you to understand better who they were. So that is what we're going to find out today. And the Vikings were actually called the Northmen back when they lived over 1,000 years ago. And that is because they started here up in Norway, which was the northern part of Europe back then. And so the English and the French and everyone who lived down here only knew them as the people to the north, the Northmen, and translated into a different language, Norse, that was called Vikings. So that's why that they had that name. They were good at sailing, very good at sailing, and that's how they expanded beyond the original territory of Norway. You can see they went all over the place, all the way into Europe and all the way over here and even into Canada, which is right above us. So that's pretty cool. They found some old buildings up in Canada where the Vikings used to live over 1,000 years ago. Isn't that amazing? So I want to show you a picture of the ship. The typical ship that they would have sailed on. You can see the red and white sails, and that's how they could tell it was a Viking ship. Usually the sail told them that. And then it was called a long ship because it was very long and very low, and they used oars. That's what these paddles are called. They rowed the boat across the ocean. And if you haven't noticed, I have a recreation of the front of what a Viking longship would look like. They often carved the front of their ships with these fantastic creatures and mythical beasts, and it was kind of part of their culture. It was part of their legends that they told as storytellers, so they incorporated that into their ships as well. So, and yes, they were fierce warriors, so that's why they were able to expand so much into other lands and territories, because they often fought wars with their neighbors and won, and so got a lot of land and treasure that way. So, but they also weren't always fierce warriors and fighters. They were regular farmers and family people who just lived on the land and lived a normal life like you or I might. So they even made their own clothing. And I kind of want to show you this costume that I have on. This is what a typical Viking outfit would look like. I have a picture in my book here of what a Viking outfit would look like for a man and a woman. So I am dressed like a typical Viking woman, and right here, this underdress was called a seek, and it was made of linen, and oftentimes the sleeves were cinched or pleated at the bottom. That was a very fashionable thing at the time, and it was a very long dress. It extends all the way to the floor. Over top of it, they would wear a woolen pinafore. That's what this is called, and it was just kind of like a wrap around them, and it was attached with these thick straps at the shoulder, and right here where it attached to the bottom part, this was called a brooch, and it was a very ornate piece of jewelry that they thought was also a piece of fashion accessory. And you can see all the colorful beads and jewelry that I have on. Contrary to popular belief, Vikings really liked a lot of color and patterns. They liked bright colors. They thought it was typical of high fashion at the time to wear a bunch of bright colors. So they collected a bunch of colorful beads and made many pieces of jewelry out of them. And they also carved jewelry out of precious metals like gold and silver. And I want to show you this brooch from over 1,000 years ago. This is an actual brooch, like I had mentioned right here, that they carved. And it's Remember we talked about last time what a primary source was? It's something that actually came from the time period that was made by the people over 1,000 years ago. So as you can see, this is called a pitney brooch, and it was carved out of gold. And if you look closely, it might be kind of hard to see, but you can see two animals fighting in kind of a circular pattern. And you can see a snake biting a four-legged animal in this brooch. And animals and mythical creatures were very popular in Viking jewelry because it was part of the stories that they told, kind of like with their longship here. And you'll find that out, that it's a very popular thing in Viking culture. And so the women wore this dress, and then the men wore something called a kirtle, which was a shorter overshirt. And underneath they wore pants and leather boots. And they often wear belts that have pouches and keys and knives, anything that they might have used every day to hang on their belt, so it was within easy reach. So Vikings, like I said, made their own clothes. They raised their own sheep, which is where they got their wool. And then they wove that wool into yarn. And then I have a picture of a Viking loom that I want to show you. This is a typical Viking loom. And a loom is it's like a wooden framework. And they would string up the wool fibers on this loom and then kind of weave in and out with the other wool and yarn and create fabric. And it took a very, very long time to create just one dress like I have on. It may have taken months. But they worked diligently at it because that's the only way they could get clothes. They didn't have factories or stores to go to. But they nonetheless made tons of pretty stuff. So, and they also grew their own foods. Like I had said, they were farmers. So they raised a lot of vegetables and crops and gathered berries and fruit from the forest and raised cows and pigs for milk and meat and goats and stuff like that, and fished for the fish in the ocean because, as you saw on our map, Norway is surrounded by water, so fish were easy to get. And they also got seals and whales and things like that. And they built their own houses, and they were called longhouses. And I want you to take a look at this picture and see if you can figure out why they were called longhouses. Kind of looks different from a house that you and I might live in today, huh? Well, it was obviously a very long house, and whole entire families and extended families would live in the same house. And even animals sometimes. During the cold winter months, they would bring their animals inside. They wouldn't put them in a separate barn. They just have them in a separate room in the house. And these houses were made out of very strong wood that they would get from the local forests. And they also used the same wood to build other fascinating buildings. And this is one of my favorite Viking buildings that is actually an original. It's not rebuilt. It's actually still standing over 800 years later from when they built it. And this is actually a church. I believe it's in Norway. And it's called a stave church because the wooden posts that were used to support it were called staves. And I just find that to be a fascinating building. I would love to go see that one day. Isn't that cool? And it's 800 years old and it still looks like that. All right. Now that I showed you all their buildings, I want to tell you a little bit about what they did for fun. They told lots of stories, and they loved music, and they loved poetry. And a lot of their poetry and music and art featured animals, like I said, but it also featured mythical creatures and the gods and goddesses that they believed in. It was their religion, as opposed to Christianity today. They believed in various different gods and goddesses, and that lived in another world that was connected to our world with a rainbow bridge, actually. And so they wrote in a language called Old Norse. And here I have a picture of the rock rune stone, which shows you what their letters might have looked like back then. And these were called runes. They're very stick-like characters. And they would carve into the rocks. They would carve these runes into the rocks. And then if you can notice, you can see the paint that they would paint over it with, so it was kind of easier to see. So this is a primary source as well, because this was originally created by Vikings that lived 1,000 years ago. And this is what their language looked like. And so a lot of the stories that they liked to tell involved, like I said, mythical creatures. So I have a book here that I'm going to read to you. And in this book, there's 3 Vikings that fight some mythical creatures. But there's also a lot of other themes and stuff in here that we kind of just talked about. And so when I read through this book and show you the pictures, I want you to see how many you can find of the things we talked about, or pictures that you see that might look familiar to you. And so it's called The 3 Vikings by Adam Auerbach. As you can see, right on the front there, we have our long ship with the sail and the mythical creature, the Kraken. So let's get started. Oh, there's the swirling animal patterns that we often see in the jewelry of the Vikings, right here on the front page. Three Vikings were sitting around a campfire. The littlest one was singing about Valhalla, the magical place where the strongest and bravest Vikings go. He sang of Valhalla's never-ending feasts, the golden tree that grows outside its doors, and the magical goat that nibbles golden branches. So once again, right from the start, we have our littlest Vikings singing, which is what they love to do, singing about all these legends and myths that they had, such as the goat that nibbles the golden branches. And the other two are listening. One day I will be invited to Valhalla, said the first Viking, because I am the strongest. Yes, you are, said the others. And one day I will be invited to Valhalla, said the second Viking, because I am the bravest. Yes, you are, said the others. One day I, too, will be invited to Valhalla, said the littlest Viking. The other two didn't say a word. He's little. I don't know if he's strong or brave, because he's so small. That night, all three Vikings dreamed that they were summoned to Valhalla. To get there, they had to travel over the tallest mountains, across the widest sea, and through the darkest forest. So here's their long ship sailing across the sea, in the tall mountains and the dark forest. Whoa, what do we have here? They set off the next morning, but when they reached the tallest mountains, they came upon an ornery troll. No need to worry, said the little Viking. He began to sing a calming song. Remember we talked about how Vikings love to sing songs? So they must have been pretty good at it. But the troll was not interested in music. Oh, you can see he's pretty angry. Luckily, the strongest Viking was able to give the troll a lift back right to where he belonged, at the very top of the mountain. Thanks, said the little Viking. But if there's any more trouble, I will take care of it. The other Vikings didn't reply. We'll see how that goes. And off they sail on their long ship again. You can see the animal on the front of it, kind of like our long ship right there. While sailing over the widest sea, the Vikings ran into trouble again. Oh my goodness, look at the creature we have here. Let me handle this, said the little Viking. He began to sing a lullaby. But the Kraken would not go to sleep. So this is our Kraken, which was a giant sea beast, kind of like a giant squid that the Vikings thought lived in the oceans. Luckily, the bravest Viking was there to help. He dove right in. And she's going to take the Kraken back to his house. Thanks, said the little Viking, but next time I've got it covered. The other two Vikings remained silent. Another beast. Look at what we have here. Deep in the darkest forest, the Vikings bumped into a fire-breathing dragon. Stand back, everyone, said the little Viking. He began to play his wildest dance tune. Does the dragon look like he's interested? He looks pretty scary. Oh, look what we have here. It says, the dragon loved the song, but decided that she wanted the littlest Viking's instrument for herself. Oops, she tried to steal it. The other Vikings gave up their shields so that their friend could keep his lyre. So that's an interesting word, lyre. And it's not like a liar, like you're not telling the truth. It's actually a musical instrument. And it's kind of like a harp. I actually have a picture of one right here for you. Right there. So you can see it kind of had wooden framework and the strings tied into it. And it kind of played like a harp or a guitar back in the day. And they would sing songs with that. And the dragon could make some music of her own. Thank you very much, said the little Viking. Next time I'll be able to help, right? Maybe you should just leave things to us, said the other two. Oh, take a close look at this picture. Remember the rainbow bridge that I talked about that connects the world of the gods and goddesses to our world? After traveling for what felt like years, the three Vikings finally arrived at Valhalla. I knew I would make it here because I am the strongest, said the first Viking. I knew I would make it here because I am the bravest, said the second Viking. But why am I here, said the little Viking. The two other Vikings didn't know what to say. And you can see that the building here is built out of the wood, and it has the shields on top, and it kind of looks like a longhouse. When the three Vikings entered the grand hall at Valhalla, they were greeted by a cheering crowd. Yeah! Once everyone saw the little Viking's lyre, they called out for him to sing, and Valhalla was full of strong and brave Vikings, but none of them were musicians. They had been waiting for just the right Viking to come along and fill their days with music and stories. So the littlest Viking did find something that he was good at and that he enjoyed. He may not have been the biggest, and he may not have been the strongest or the bravest, but he knew how to sing a good song and tell a good story, and that is just as good. And what's more important is he loved doing it. This is the song of the three Vikings and their journey to Valhalla, said the little Viking. And then he began to play his lyre and sing. At last, the little Viking was happy to be helpful. And that's the end of our story. Were you able to find any pictures in here of things that we talked about? You saw the long ship and the animals that they encountered and the creatures and the lyre that he was playing and the rainbow bridge. All sorts of fun things that are part of the Viking culture. And at the end here in the grand hall, you can see that they were all eating a giant feast together. So I want to talk a little bit about what you would find at a typical Viking meal. And I have a few things here. So let me pull them over. So if you can see here, I have some fruit, an apple, onions, which were very popular. I have some nuts, some walnuts. They ate a lot of nuts that they harvested, and some flatbreads here, which actually I'm going to show you how to make in just a few moments. And they sweetened their food with honey. They didn't have sugar, so they collected the honey from the beehives in the local area, and they would drizzle it on their bread and their fruit and their porridge, and it would just tasted so yummy. So these flatbreads, I'm going to show you how to make some. They're actually really yummy, and they're really super simple. You don't even have to turn on the oven because it's kind of hot outside in the summer to turn on the oven. So you can cook these right over the stove. So let me get my ingredients. So what you need for this are 3 different types of flour. Now, they wouldn't usually use white flour back then like we would use in our baking today, because that is very processed and refined. And they got their flour right from the source, which means they harvested it and just ground it right up there. So it wasn't the typical white flour. And so right here I have some barley flour, some oat flour, and some whole wheat flour. And these are already ground up into the fine, floury, powdery substance. But back then, they would have actually had the whole grain, and they would have had to use what we call a corn mill, which looks like this right here. And I don't have one of those, and I don't have the means to make one because they're giant stones that you have to drill holes into. So I will kind of explain how it works with this picture. It's just 2 giant wheels that are sitting on top of each other made of heavy, heavy stone. And you can see the hole in the middle right here. And they would pour the grain into that hole and then turn the top wheel around with a stick right here. And as they turned it, the grain would grind between the 2 stones here. And it would grind and grind and grind until it turned into a flour like this. And then it would pour out the sides here once it got to be that consistency. And then they would gather it up, and then they would have their freshly ground flour. So let's make our bread. I have a 1/4 cup of the barley flour, which I'm going to pour in here. A 1/4 cup of the oat flour. And a 1/4 cup of the whole wheat flour. And so we have our flour in there. And then I'm going to take a 1/4 cup of yogurt, which is also something that they ate a lot of back then. They made fresh yogurt and a thing called skyr, which is a very thick, unsweetened yogurt made from goat's milk or cow's milk. And they often used it in baking because it gave the bread a nice flavor and fermentation. So we're going to put that in. There's our yogurt. And I also have a 1/2 teaspoon of salt right here for flavoring. So we're going to pour that in. And you can also add other flavorings like fresh herbs or dried herbs, or even a little. And then finally, I have about a 1/4 cup of water. So this isn't really a solid measurement. You kind of got to add a little bit at a time until you get the right consistency. And what you want is like kind of a bread-like dough that isn't really sticky enough that you can mix it with your hands and it won't stick to your hands. You want it a little bit stiff. So I'm going to add a little bit at a time. Pour it in there, and I'll show you how I mix it. And it's okay, you can either add a little bit more water or a little bit more flour, depending on what you need. This looks like it might actually be good. And you just want to kind of stir it and knead it until it's the right consistency, which I think it is. Can you see? It doesn't stick when I poke it. So what you want to do now, you can't use it right away. You got to let it sit for about 30 minutes and to let it rest and kind of mix together and soften out. So you let it sit for 30 minutes, and then you come back after that 30 minutes, and then you can start to form it into your flatbreads. So I'm just going to take a little piece right here to show you. Kind of roll it out between your palms and flatten it out. You kind of want it really thin because it's not going to bake for a very long time. Maybe about 1/4 inch thick, like that, like a little pancake. And then now you're going to let it sit for another 20 minutes to kind of rest and soften out and mix together. And then after the 20 minutes is up, now you're ready to bake it or cook it. And for that, you're going to heat a skillet on top of your stove. This is when you're going to need Mom and Dad's help, because I don't recommend you using the stove by yourself. So make sure you have an older brother or sister, or Mom and Dad, or Grandma and Grandpa to help you with this part. So you're going to heat up your skillet on the stove, and then when it's nice and warm, and when your bread has been sitting for about 20 minutes, you're just going to plop it on there. And wait till it turns golden brown on one side for 2 or 3 minutes, and flip it over, and wait till it turns golden brown on the other side. And then when it's all done, what you have left is this yummy, yummy flatbread. And I can assure you, this tastes very good. I already tried some. See how it's not like your typical fluffy loaf today, but it's got some good flavor because of the yogurt and the different grains that we put in it. So this is a typical Viking flatbread that they would have eaten. And you can drizzle honey on it or whatever you'd like. Serve it with fresh fruit and berries. So that is how you make Viking flatbread. And I would love to hear if you made some at home. You can come in and visit me here at Pueblo West and tell me how it went, or show me pictures. I would just love to see them and hear about it. So that is our time learning about the Vikings today. So I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed it, and I hope you definitely make that Viking flatbread recipe. Our next History Hullabaloo is on September 19th at 10:30 in the morning, and for that we're going to be talking all about castles, how they built them and what they were used for. So I hope you can join me then, and I will see you next time. Bye.